Hey, what's going on guys, it's Harry here. Today I want to go through 3 different types of shoes that people typically buy for squatting. Most of these shoes are like advertised for squatting or some sort of lifting as opposed to just running shoes and other gym shoes. And I want to take them and go through to see which ones are best for different types of squatting movements. So let's get right into this video. Hope you guys enjoy it. Alright, so the first shoes we're going to be looking at are these Reebok CrossFit Light TRs. So these are very similar to Converse Chuck Taylors. They're similar to Nike Metcons and any other shoe that has a pretty flat sole and not much of a heel. I believe it's a 4mm heel to toe drop they call it. So not much of an elevated heel. These shoes will run you about $50 if they're on sale. The Metcons are up to like $120, and you can buy Chuck Taylors on sale for like $30. The next shoes are the Reebok Powerlift Trainer 2.0s. These have 3/5 of an inch heel, so a little over half an inch, but not that much higher. They're not as high as Olympic shoes, which you'll see in a little bit, and they have a very solid platform on the bottom, very flat. So they're ideal really for squatting. That's what they're made for. Not so much for Olympic lifts. These shoes will cost you about $90. You could probably find them on sale, but typically the main price is $90. And the last shoes are Olympic weightlifting shoes. So these are Nike Romaleos. You can tell that the heel on these is a lot higher. It's 3/4 of an inch as opposed to 3/5 of an inch on the powerlift shoes. These are similar to the Adidas Adi Powers, and there's a few other weightlifting shoes out there that have a similar 3/4 of an inch heel, but I'm not too sure what those are, but you could definitely look them up. These shoes and most other weightlifting shoes are going to cost you probably anywhere from $150 a pair to up to $200. So getting into squatting, the goal of any squat is to keep your heels planted flat on the ground, keep the bar path over your mid-foot line, and to keep your torso pretty much as upright as possible. In some squats there's some benefit to kind of folding over at the hip a little bit more to activate some more posterior chain if you're stronger that way, but for the most part you want to keep your heels on the floor, keep the bar path over the midfoot, and pretty much keep your torso and hip angle as upright as possible. So if you take a look at a pair of shoes like these, the Chuck Taylors, the CrossFit Light TRs, or the Nike Metcons, these are going to be difficult for front squatting for most people. The reason for that is that front squatting requires a very high degree of ankle dorsiflexion. So what ankle dorsiflexion is the angle at which your foot and your knee are kind of creating. So when you're doing a front squat, your knees are going to track really far out over your toes, and that's going to increase or to decrease this angle of ankle dorsiflexion. And so why these wouldn't be ideal for most people is that they're not really helping you, they're not really giving you any benefit, so you're solely relying on your own ankle flexibility to create that angle of dorsiflexion. What you'll typically see when people try to front squat in these shoes is their heels are going to rise up off the floor, they're going to go up on their toes to make up for that lack of ankle flexibility, and that's going to either cause them to fall back, fall forward. If they try to stay on their heels, they're definitely going to fall backwards, and their torso just isn't going to remain as upright as it should be during a front squat. Taking a look at the Adidas Powerlift shoes for a front squat, these are definitely a little bit better because they have the 3/5 of an inch heel, so that's going to artificially increase your ability to get your knees out a little bit further over your toes, and that's going to decrease your angle of ankle dorsiflexion, which is going to be beneficial for you to sit back a little bit more, keep the bar over your midfoot, which it should be, and keep your torso a little bit more upright, which is how it really should be when you're doing a front squat. You shouldn't be kind of folding at the hip at all. Most people, when you see them front squat in shoes like these, or even like the smaller heel shoes like the CrossFit Light TRs, they're going to be folding over a little bit more, and that's to compensate with the bar path in order to keep it over your midfoot, and the fact that they're not able to kind of sit back enough in the squat. So lastly, these shoes have the highest heel, and these allow you to artificially create the most amount of ankle dorsiflexion which will allow you to put your knees out over your toes the most, allow you to sit back much more comfortably in a front squat, keep your torso angle as upright as possible, and keep the bar path over your midfoot. So these are definitely going to be the best for most people when it comes to front squatting, and that's why you see a lot of Olympic weightlifters training in these while they're doing front squats. So going into high bar squats, again, very similar to the front squat, the high bar squat requires a pretty high degree of ankle dorsiflexion, so your knees are going to track a little bit further over your toes as they would in a front squat. So again, these are going to make it difficult, because if you want to create that high angle of dorsiflexion, your heels are most likely going to be coming up off the floor unless you just have really flexible ankles. And if you do come up off the floor, you're going to be on your toes, you're going to be falling forward. If you try to keep your heels planted while high bar squatting in these, you're going to be falling backwards. And if you end up staying on your heels as much as possible, the bar path may not be directly under your midfoot, causing you to fold over a lot more than you should in the high bar squat. In the high bar squat, you really want to be as upright as possible. The Adidas Powerlifts are a great option for the high bar squat. Again, they're much cheaper than Olympic weightlifting shoes, and they're going to provide you with a little bit of aided ankle dorsiflexion that the flat shoes would not. So allowing you to get your toes or your knees a little bit further out over your toes, allowing you to sit back in the hole more while keeping the bar over your midfoot, and that's going to help you not break too much at the hip and causing you to kind of fold over like you see a lot of people do on high bar squats. And that's assuming that you're trying to hit depth on these squats. So if you see people squatting in flat shoes or shoes like these doing high bar squats, they're either not going to be hitting depth, or they're going to be hitting depth and folding over at the hip while they try to come out of the hole. And lastly, again, these are probably the best option for most people when it comes to high bar squatting. It really allows you to get your knees out over your toes, allows you to sit back a lot more comfortably and keep the bar over your midfoot, and allow you to stand up and have the greatest upright torso that you want to have during a high bar squat. Again, you see a lot of Olympic lifters using these shoes when it comes to high bar squatting, because that's pretty much what Olympic lifters do all the time, high bar squat and front squat, and they're always going to be wearing the Olympic shoes just because it helps them stay a lot more upright, which is the most specific to their competition lifts. And lastly, what powerlifters are most interested in is the low bar back squat. So if you look at these shoes, they're going to be pretty good for low bar squatting depending on your morphology and your biomechanics. So again, as I've been talking about the whole time, ankle dorsiflexion is the biggest thing in any squat, and when it comes to low bar squatting is when you see the most individual deviation when it comes to those angles of ankle dorsiflexion. So some people are able to sit back really far and keep their knees almost right above their ankles, in which case these shoes would be a great option for you. You don't need as great of an angle of ankle dorsiflexion, so they're not going to kind of limit you when it comes to that. As long as you're able to keep the bar over midfoot, a lot of those people that sit back really far tend to fold over a lot more, but they're also much stronger in their posterior chain, so they can handle that. So if you're a person who low bar squats, sits really far back, and is able to use your posterior chain a lot more, these shoes might be a good option for you when it comes to low bar squatting. So when it comes to low bar squatting in the Adidas Powerlift shoes, if you're one to kind of treat it a little bit more like an Olympic squat, in which your knees kind of move over your toes and not quite your ankles, they move forward a little bit, you need a little bit more ankle dorsiflexion, these shoes might be better for you. In which case, if your knees are traveling a little bit further forward, your torso is able to stay a lot more upright, in which case you're able to use a little bit more of your quads in that movement, as opposed to leaving it 100% to your posterior chain. These also help keep your heels down because they offer the elevated heel while you're sitting really far back into a low bar squat. When you see people squatting in flat shoes, their heels may tend to come up a little bit, and they're going to be putting a lot more weight towards the front of their foot. So these shoes are definitely a great option if you're one that keeps your torso upright a little bit more in the low bar squat, get your knees out a little bit further over your toes or even just above your toes, and still want to be able to sit back and use your posterior chain during a low bar squat. And lastly, for a low bar squat, I believe that these shoes are for people who have very, very limited ankle dorsiflexion flexibility. They can't really naturally get their knees out over their toes, so they need the heel height, the 3/4 of an inch heel height that these offer, in order to get your knees out just a little bit more, allow you to sit back, keep your torso just a little bit more upright. Again, the angle of your torso is going to kind of determine where the bar path is. If it's going to be staying over your midfoot or not, and depending on the angle of ankle dorsiflexion that you're able to get out of these, that's going to determine how upright your torso can stay. So I hope this video was informative for you guys. I didn't want to make it too long, but I did want to go over the different types of squatting shoes and how they kind of relate to the 3 different main types of squats that you see people doing in Olympic weightlifting, in powerlifting, and in CrossFit, just to do different styles of training to either target your quads more, which would be more of a front squat, high bar squat, or to target your posterior chain a little bit more, like a low bar squat, and be able to squat the most amount of weight for powerlifting. So again, I hope you guys found it a little bit informative. Thanks for watching. Leave me a comment and see what else you guys want to see on this topic or on different topics, and we'll see you in the next one.